My wife told me. My feelings were too much work, so I packed my bags, left her behind, and let her wonder why it all fell apart. I'm a 32-year-old man who thought he had everything figured out. A stable job, a cozy home, and a woman I genuinely believed was my best friend. My wife, Emily, wasn't just my partner, she was my person, the one I thought I could build a lifetime with. We'd been married for 5 years, and for most of it, I truly believed we were happy. We used to do everything together. Midnight drives, cooking experiments, stupid Netflix binges where she'd fall asleep halfway through every movie. Our friends would joke that we were couple goals. I used to smile when they said that, proud of what we had built. But somewhere along the way, something changed. It wasn't sudden. There wasn't a big fight or betrayal at first. Just silence. The kind of silence that creeps in slowly. So slowly that you don't even realize it's replacing laughter. I'd come home from work and she'd be scrolling on her phone, barely looking up. When I tried to tell her about my day, she'd nod without listening. I told myself it was stress, that every marriage has rough patches. I kept waiting for things to feel normal again. One night, I asked her if she was okay. She said, "I'm fine. You're just overthinking again." I remember feeling embarrassed, like I'd done something wrong by caring too much. That was the first time I felt a crack. Tiny, invisible, but real. I brushed it off, told myself love could fix anything. But deep down, something inside me whispered that the woman I married wasn't really there anymore. Still, I held on. Because when you've built your whole world around someone, you don't notice the walls collapsing until you're standing in the dust. It started with little things. I'd tell her something that mattered to me. A small win at work, a memory that popped up, a random thought about our future, and she'd respond with a distracted, "That's nice." No eye contact. No follow-up question. Just a flat, empty tone that made me feel stupid for even bringing it up. At first, I thought she was just tired. I'd tell myself, she's working hard, give her space. But then space turned into walls. If I tried to talk about something deeper, like how I'd been feeling disconnected, she'd sigh and say, "You're being too sensitive again." That sentence became a brick between us. Every time she said it, I'd shrink a little more. I started noticing how her laughter changed too. It wasn't the warm, contagious laugh I fell in love with. It was sharp, performative, especially when other people were around. She'd light up in front of friends, but the second we were alone, it was like someone flipped a switch. One evening, I cooked her favorite pasta and set up a movie night. She sat beside me scrolling through her phone, barely touching the food. Halfway through the movie, she just stood up and said, "I'm going to bed." No explanation. No kiss goodnight. That night, I sat alone on the couch, the TV flickering against the empty wall, wondering when my marriage had become a waiting room. Me, sitting there hoping she'd finally look up and notice I was still there. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. She smiled, poured coffee, and asked if I could pick up groceries after work. And I did. Because when you love someone, you don't fight their distance. You try to close it, even if they keep pushing you away. I remember the night like it's tattooed on my memory. It was late, around 11:30. I was sitting at the edge of our bed trying to talk to Emily again. I told her I missed how things used to be. I missed us. She didn't even look up from her phone, so I said it louder this time. "Em, can we just talk, please? I feel like we're drifting apart." She sighed, rolled her eyes, and muttered, "God, not this again." My stomach twisted. I said, "I'm not trying to argue, I need to know if you even care anymore." That's when she snapped. She put her phone down, looked right at me and said, "You know what your problem is? Your feelings are too much work. I can't keep babysitting your emotions every time you get sad." I just froze. Those words didn't sound like frustration. They sounded like disgust. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My throat went dry, my chest tight. All I could think was too much work. The person I loved most in the world just reduced my heart to a chore. She went back to scrolling, like the conversation never happened, and I just sat there in the dark, trying not to cry loud enough for her to hear. That night, something inside me shut down. I realized no matter how much I tried to explain my pain, she had already decided it wasn't worth her time. I wanted to yell, to make her see what she was doing to me. But instead, I went silent, because silence felt safer than being mocked for feeling anything at all. That was the night my marriage stopped being a partnership and started feeling like a punishment. After that night, I stopped trying to fix things, not because I didn't care anymore, but because I finally understood that she didn't. Every time I tried to talk, she'd shut me down. So I learned to smile instead, to play the role of the happy husband in a marriage that was already falling apart. We still went to dinners with friends, still posted smiling pictures, still said, "love you" before bed like it was routine maintenance, something you do to keep the machine running. But behind closed doors, we were strangers. Two people sharing walls, not a life. She'd crack jokes at my expense in front of others, little jabs disguised as humor. "Oh, don't mind him," she'd say. "He's always overthinking." Everyone would laugh. I'd force a smile, pretending it didn't sting. But every laugh felt like a knife, twisting a little deeper each time. At home, the silence grew heavier. I'd find myself sitting in the living room long after she'd gone to bed, just staring at the dark TV screen. I started writing in a journal, something my therapist once suggested before we got married. I'd write everything I couldn't say out loud, how lonely I felt, how small I'd become, how love had turned into obligation. Some nights, I'd reread my own words and barely recognize the man on those pages. I used to be confident, passionate, full of plans. Now I was just a ghost with a wedding ring, but I kept pretending, because pretending was easier than fighting. And deep down, I was terrified. Terrified that if I stopped pretending, I'd have to admit the truth, that my marriage wasn't broken. It was already dead. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday night. Emily had left her laptop open on the dining table while she showered. I wasn't snooping, at least not intentionally. I just went to grab my keys and noticed a message notification pop up. The name was unfamiliar, but the preview stopped me cold. It said, "You always make me laugh. I wish we could talk like this in person." My heart started racing. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. What I found wasn't a smoking gun. Not yet. It was a thread of flirty, late-night conversations between her and a coworker named Ryan. Nothing explicitly sexual, but the tone was intimate. Inside jokes, emotional confessions, things she hadn't said to me in months. She told him about her distant husband, how she felt trapped in a one-sided relationship. I sat there reading line after line, feeling my stomach twist tighter with each one. When she came out of the shower, I was still sitting at the table, the screen glowing in front of me. I said quietly, "Who's Ryan?" Her face changed instantly, shock, then defensiveness. "Why are you going through my messages?" She snapped. "I wasn't," I said. "It was open, I just saw." She rolled her eyes like I was the problem. "You're overreacting. He's just a friend. God, you're so paranoid." That word, paranoid, hit me hard, because that's how emotional manipulators win. They make you doubt your own eyes. I wanted to yell, to ask her why she shared her heart with someone else when she'd locked me out. But instead, I just said, "You don't talk to me like that anymore." She shrugged. "Maybe if you didn't make everything so heavy." And just like that, she walked away, leaving me sitting in front of the evidence of her emotional betrayal, wondering when being a good husband became something to apologize for. After that night, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was quiet, like a glass cracking under pressure you can't see. I stopped asking questions, stopped trying to fix anything. I just existed. Emily, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. She'd still text that guy sometimes, always with her phone face down on the counter. If I glanced her way, she'd smirk like she knew I wouldn't dare bring it up again. And she was right. I didn't. I didn't have the strength to be dismissed one more time. I started losing sleep. Nights stretched into long, hollow hours where I'd stare at the ceiling replaying everything. Every moment I'd overlooked, every sign I'd ignored. I'd go to work exhausted, pretending to be fine while I felt like I was rotting from the inside out. One night, I sent her a message. It wasn't angry, just honest. I told her I missed her, that I still wanted to make things work, that I just needed her to see me again. The next day, I caught her laughing at her phone. When I asked what was funny, she turned the screen toward me, showing the message I'd written, and said, "You're so dramatic." And she laughed. At my pain. At me. That moment broke me in ways I can't fully explain. I went numb. Completely empty. I stopped eating properly, stopped talking to friends. My world shrank to silence and self-blame. People at work asked if I was okay, but I kept saying, just tired. Because how do you tell someone that the person you love the most has turned your heart into a joke? That was my rock bottom. The moment I realized I wasn't living in a marriage anymore, I was surviving inside a performance I never agreed to be part of. I didn't make a grand decision one night. There was no dramatic realization, no shouting, no tears. It just happened. One morning, I woke up, looked at her sleeping beside me, and realized I didn't recognize the person next to me anymore. She looked the same, but the woman I fell in love with, the one who used to reach for my hand under the table, who used to ask how my day really was, she was gone. That day, I started planning my exit, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. I opened a separate bank account, quietly transferring small amounts of money from each paycheck. I started browsing for small apartments after work. Nothing fancy, just somewhere peaceful, somewhere mine. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want pity or advice. I just needed a plan. At home, I played my part. I cooked dinner, made small talk, smiled when she was in a good mood. But every night before bed, I'd write a single sentence in my journal. I'm leaving soon. It became a mantra, something that reminded me there was still a version of me beyond her contempt. Therapy helped, too. My therapist asked, "What are you afraid will happen if you leave?" I said, "She'll think I didn't try hard enough." He smiled gently and said, "You've been trying to build a bridge alone. Maybe it's time to stop walking into the fire." That line stayed with me. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of peace. Not joy, just calm. The kind that comes when you finally stop begging someone to love you. I didn't know when or how I'd do it yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done living in a home where I had to shrink just to be tolerated. It happened on a Thursday morning. Nothing special, nothing planned. Just another day that started with her complaining about the coffee being too bitter and me standing there, wondering when everything we shared had turned so sour. I remember she was getting ready for work, brushing her hair in front of the mirror. I tried one last time to talk. "Em," I said softly, "do you even want to be with me anymore?" She looked at me through the mirror, her face blank. "You always ask the same questions." "You're exhausting." That word, exhausting, was the final crack. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and said, "You're right." When she left for work, I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to her car fade down the street. Then, quietly, I started packing. I didn't rush. I folded my clothes neatly, gathered the books she'd never touched, packed the photo frames face down. There was a strange calmness in every movement, like my body already knew this was freedom, even if my heart hadn't caught up yet. I left her a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "You were right. My feelings are too much work. So I'm taking them with me." That was it. No explanations, no anger, just truth. When I closed the door behind me, the silence hit different. It didn't hurt anymore. It felt clean, like the first breath after a storm finally ends. I drove for hours with no destination. Just open road, radio humming, suitcase in the back seat, and a quiet realization growing inside me. Sometimes love doesn't end in flames. Sometimes it ends when you finally realize the only way to save yourself is to leave. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The first few days after I left were eerily quiet. No yelling, no guilt trips, no walking on eggshells. Just silence. I stayed in a small one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of new paint and loneliness. The walls were bare, the bed was small, but for the first time in years, I could breathe. Then the calls started. First 1, then 5, then 20. At first she was angry. "Are you seriously ghosting me like a child?" Then came the guilt trips. "You're abandoning your wife? After everything I did for you?" I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because I knew if I heard her voice, I'd lose my resolve. By the end of the week, the texts turned emotional. "I just want to talk. I don't understand what happened. You're overreacting." But the truth was, she did understand. She just never thought I'd actually walk away. Then came the social media posts. Quotes about men who can't handle strong women. Pictures with fake smiles, captions like healing and thriving. Our mutual friends started messaging me, asking if everything was okay. I just told them, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just needed space." But privately, I was rebuilding. Therapy became my anchor. I started eating better, going on walks, sleeping without that knot of anxiety in my chest. I'd forgotten what peace sounded like until I found it again. One night, I looked through my old journal, the one filled with desperate notes, lonely confessions, and half-broken promises to myself. I tore out the last page and wrote, "I made it out." And that night, for the first time in forever, I didn't dream about her. I dreamed about sunlight, open space, and the sound of my own laughter, something I hadn't heard in years. The fallout didn't destroy me. It rebuilt me. A few months passed before I heard the rumors. At first, I ignored them. I didn't care what Emily was saying. But then a mutual friend reached out, someone I trusted. He said, "Man, I think you should know what she's been telling people." Apparently, she'd been painting herself as the victim. She told everyone I was emotionally unstable, controlling, and that I left because I couldn't handle her independence. Made it sound like I was the problem, like my pain was the reason she'd pulled away. I remember just sitting there listening in silence. I wasn't angry, just tired of carrying blame for someone else's choices. But then came the twist. That same friend lowered his voice and said, "Look, I didn't want to say anything, but she was seeing that coworker. It wasn't just emotional. It got physical months before you left." For a second, the world went quiet. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Everything suddenly made sense. The distance, the coldness, the contempt. She hadn't just fallen out of love. She'd replaced me while still expecting me to stay and keep pretending everything was fine. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I'd spent years torturing myself over what I did wrong, and the truth was, I'd never stood a chance. People asked if I was going to expose her, but I didn't see the point. I wasn't interested in revenge or vindication. The truth had already done the work for me. I realized that peace doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from no longer needing to. So I stayed quiet. I let her version of the story live where it belonged, among people who didn't matter anymore, because I didn't need the world to know what she did. I just needed to know I survived it. 6 months had passed since I left. 6 months of silence, therapy, and slowly learning how to live without needing someone else's approval. I'd stopped checking her socials, stopped wondering what she was doing. I was finally starting to feel okay. Then one morning, I got a message. Just a simple, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a while, debating whether to ignore it. But a part of me, the part that wanted true closure, said yes. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place where the music's soft and no one looks too closely. When I walked in, she was already there. She looked smaller somehow, tired. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. She smiled weakly and said, "You look good." "Yeah," I said. "I am." There was a long silence before she spoke again. She said she missed me, that she didn't realize what she had until it was gone, that maybe we could start over. Her words sounded rehearsed, like she was trying to rewind something that had already burned down. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. And when she finally asked, "Do you think we can fix this?" I said quietly, "The version of me who begged for love doesn't exist anymore." She stared at me, eyes wide, lips trembling, like she was seeing a stranger. And maybe she was. I didn't stay long after that. I paid for both coffees, stood up, and said, "Take care of yourself, Emily." As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face and I realized closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim the moment you stop letting their words define your worth. It's been a year since that conversation. A year since I walked out of that cafe and decided I wasn't going to live my life begging to be understood. I moved to a quieter part of town, bought a few plants, started running in the mornings. It's strange how peace sneaks up on you, quietly, without applause. I still think about her sometimes. Not out of love, but out of gratitude. Because surviving her taught me something I should have learned years ago. That peace isn't found in someone else's arms. It's found when you stop handing your heart to people who don't know how to hold it. Every once in a while, mutual friends mention her. They say she asks about me, wonders how I'm doing. I don't give them much to tell. I just smile and say, "I'm doing great." Because she doesn't deserve the full story. She doesn't get to know how much stronger I've become. She once told me my feelings were too much work. Now she's the one left wondering why it all fell apart. The truth, it fell apart because love dies where empathy ends. Because a heart can only be stepped on so many times before it decides to stop showing up. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left so I could finally stop hurting. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my balcony with a cup of coffee and think about everything that happened. The lies, the silence, the laughter that wasn't real. And instead of bitterness, I feel peace. Because the best revenge isn't anger. It's rebuilding your life so beautifully that the person who broke you can only look back and wonder how you ever loved them through the pain. And that's exactly what I let her do. I let her wonder.